Happy Friday, everyone. My name is Alex Frankfort, and I'm head of product at Xata. Welcome to another session of Meet the Makers. Today, we'll be diving into a new feature we've announced today that's available in an early access program called Dedicated Clusters. Dedicated clusters are a great new way to run large-scale production workloads at Xata, with a more granular pricing model, more configuration options for the underlying infrastructure, and auto-scaling to scale up and down with your traffic. Today, we'll be diving into the development of the feature with the team and wrap up with a nice demo. Let's get started with some introductions.
Hi everyone, my name is Simona. I am part of the backend team at Xata. I'm originally from Romania, but I've been living in Berlin for the last 7 years or so. Yeah, I think that's it.
Hey, I'm Paula. I work in the platform team here at Xata. I have been here for almost a year and a half, and I live in Madrid, Spain.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm the tech lead for the platform team. I live in Hertfordshire in the UK. And things about myself. So I design and build custom mechanical keyboards. I like to buy and refurbish old Game Boys and then mod them. And I still mostly only listen to music on my 2008 iPod.
I cleaned out my attic this week and have come across an old Game Boy and an old iPod. And so I might be needing your services soon, Matt. Richard.
I'm quickly realizing that I'm much more boring than that. But hey, I'm Richard. I'm on the front end here at Xata. I live in London in the UK.
Awesome. Thanks for the introductions, everybody. And so let's dive a bit into the feature itself a little. And I was thinking, and I'm not sure who best to answer, so I might poke at some of you, but maybe to provide a quick description around what dedicated clusters are. What are some of the pain points we're trying to address with it, and how is it different than the current architecture that we're offering? And I don't know, maybe Simone, I know you've been pretty heavily involved in this project. You want to answer?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at this. For somebody who's not familiar with our current architecture, we have a control plane that only lives in one region, and then we have regional services that kind of shepherd a number of cells, and inside those cells, we call them shared cells or shared clusters because several users can access and interact with one of these cells. So in essence, the cell is shared between users. And that can lead to several issues, the most important being the noisy neighbor situation, where let's say you have a user that is heavily using the cell, and that may impact the behavior for the service for himself, but also for the other users that are basically living inside the same cell. So with the dedicated clusters, what we are trying to solve is this noisy neighbor situation. Instead of sharing a cell with other people, you will be having your own dedicated cell. What makes this more attractive is the fact that you are essentially having your own dedicated infrastructure. So if you are trying to have, let's say, small project like a hobby project, maybe that doesn't matter to you. But if you have like a production level product that you want to build, and you maybe need some sort of compliance check or security checks, having dedicated infrastructure is definitely something that makes you happy, and like makes whoever is giving you these certifications happy as well, because they can check the box that a lot of the security issues are basically solved by themselves because you're not sharing infrastructure with anyone. I'm not sure I answered the question completely, but yeah, I tried.
Yeah, no, that was good. And the shared cell architecture also is one of the reasons why we're able to offer such a generous free tier. It's an architecture that certainly lends itself to that free tier. And yeah, I don't know, maybe Matt or Paula, like this was a pretty large change on the platform. I'm wondering if you can go into a little bit of detail about some of the things we've done and the strategy that we took.
Yeah, so there was a lot of very fundamental re-architecting that we had to do internally in terms of our own services that kind of support the Xata platform, but also where those services run as well. So historically and up until the release of dedicated clusters, our services for the shared tenancy cells have run as separate services inside of Amazon ECS as the primary deployment target. But dedicated clusters kind of represents the first sizable paradigm shift, if you like, to running workloads on Kubernetes at Xata. So the choice of Kubernetes made a lot of sense based on the level of dynamism that we needed to have for this feature and everything that goes around it. So a lot of the re-architecting around the movement of those services was partially due to the switch to Kubernetes, but also we needed ways to interact with a lot of the AWS APIs and the kind of way that we would generally handle things like infrastructure as code in a completely different way that supported, frequent updates from users and the ability to change things without necessarily writing all of those things down in a file and shoving them in a Git repo somewhere. So that level of change was something that kind of lended itself to the shift to Kubernetes. But really, that in its own right encapsulates a lot of the work that we've done on the platform team as part of this.
So it sounds like the shift to Kubernetes is one of the key decisions we took early on. Were there any others that come to mind? I don't know, on the back end team, the platform team, even on the front end, Richard, was there anything that comes to mind as like a line in the sand, a key decision we had to make in order to get this feature out the door?
The thing is, I don't think any of the decisions we made are kind of like one-way doors. So we made them. We can always improve on them. I don't know if there was something that kind of defined the trajectory in a way that we can never go back and change our minds. One of the pain points that we had to address in the backend was the fact that we had, because of the way our architecture is designed, we had to store information about these new created clusters in several places. And the problem with storing data in several places is that you have to keep it in sync. Now, we had our lives made a bit easier by the fact that we didn't really have to have the same data. So you didn't have to copy it over, but it had to have like a coherent view of the same problem. So in order to solve this, I mean, there were decisions, but it was like basically there are some ways to solve this, mainly by choosing an order in which you update these places, and only, for instance, having only one of them be visible to the customer, to the user, and that kind of allows you to deal with inconsistencies only internally, and also trying to keep the data to exactly the data that you need at that level. So not having data that you don't need, because then having it in sync would give you like issues that you don't really need. So I don't know if that qualifies as a decision. It was something that we had to design pretty early on, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that would count. And then I don't know, maybe Paula, correct me if I'm wrong, but we also made the decision towards the end of the process, I think, to roll it out in just a single region initially for the early access program. Is that correct?
Yeah, we are starting just with US this one.
Yeah, so if anybody has any requests for other regions that they'd like this on, let us know. All right, and Richard, I think I'm going to pick on you because thank you for gracing us with your presence today. Was there anything memorable that came up during the development of this feature that just stands out as like, man, that was awesome, or man, that was tough? Anything that you'd like to share?
I think probably the hardest thing about dedicated clusters is that because all the underlying tech that all the other geniuses on this call have implemented, it's challenging to get the UX right to convey to users like what all the toggles and switches do. So it's quite a complex feature, trying to make sure it's clear what you can do. And I think the other thing is making sure users understand. Today, when you look at Xata, you're on the shared cluster, but we never talk about shared clusters. So I think one of the things Dave's done really well, Dave being our UX designer who couldn't make it today, is kind of showing people, hey, you're on the shared cluster, and letting them know that there's this new option so that they can upgrade to the dedicated cluster if that's what they need. So they've got their own sort of dedicated space where they're not sharing any infrastructure if that's what they want. Those were the main things. I think the other things are just UX patterns around things, like spinning up a cluster takes, a few minutes, and making sure they get an email and letting them know, hey, you need to come back in a bit when this is up and running. I think those are kind of the main things that come to mind.
Yeah, from a UX perspective, I do remember a decision early on that we made that we would kind of just provide all the options and all the dials initially, and then we maybe revisit as we make this GA to have more like simple profiles that are just like a template essentially of different use cases that you might want to select.
The other one, I've just remembered pricing as well. So sharing people accurate pricing information so that they know what to expect, which is always, as someone that uses cloud services sometimes, that's something everybody has like an AWS bill that they never quite know how to get rid of. So like we don't want to go there. So making sure people know what to expect with like their pricing and billing, and so that they're not surprised come the end of the month.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Dedicated clusters also offers us an opportunity to be more granular with the usage-based pricing than we have on the shared cell architecture. Matt, Paula, Simona, was there anything else during development that came up as memorable? I have at least one more that I can think of, but curious if there's anything that comes to mind.
I mean, I think there were quite a number of inflection points in the development of the entire feature set, and it's difficult to pick just one individually. I think because so much of the project was greenfield, and the scope of it was relatively malleable for a little while in terms of the amount of investigation that we were doing and just in seeing just exactly what we could accomplish and the kind of correct technical decisions and choices that we might want to make to facilitate those choices. We definitely went through sometimes longer, sometimes much shorter processes of trying something out, finding that it wasn't really going to work for us in the way that we need it to, and then moving on to something else. So I think from a decision standpoint, there were so many decisions that kind of happened and kind of went through as part of the entire development process over as the months went by, that culminated into the point we are now. And I think ultimately we ended up with a technical solution that was as straightforward and as simple as we could make it to facilitate what it is that we're sort of offering at the moment. But it was definitely a lot of R&D and a lot of back and forth on some of those decisions.
So this leads me to my next question, and answer it as you see fit. Is there anything, looking back on it, that you would have done differently to maybe make the R&D a bit easier, or I don't know, anything you changed with the development process that comes to mind? So
one thing that we could have gone differently was that, so we all started, all the layers started at the same time, infrastructure, backend, and frontend, which looking back could have been like, we could have started in waves, kind of like start the infrastructure first, then the backend, and then the frontend. But that could have been maybe an advantage, but also the fact that we were all spending time on this project was kind of allowing us to have conversations between the levels that I don't know if they would have happened in the same way if we weren't all involved. I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, I do remember feeling that, like, I don't know, with each one of the different like tiers of the or layers, that like some people would be ahead and would have to wait for folks to catch up, and vice versa, on the front end, back end. Um, yeah, I don't know. That was I think we worked pretty well together as a team overall, but that definitely felt like something we could go back and revisit. Okay. Well, I have one last question then before we jump into a demo. If you could talk to your users right now, what type of feedback would you be looking for?
I would want to know just if anything was confusing, because I'm a little bit nervous that maybe some stuff will be a bit confusing, like what's a cluster, or like small things like this. I think yeah, and particularly like at Xata, we have a database with branches, and I think people are going to want to move data between the shared cluster into a branch on a dedicated cluster and things like this, but maybe a little bit more advanced use cases. Or have a staging branch which is on the shared cluster and production being dedicated instances and things like this. And I think, yeah, maybe there's some like edge cases there we'll need to think about.
I think the power of the dedicated clusters can be seen if you have like a really high, like you'll see it from the demo as well. It behaves like a normal cluster, except that it's only yours. So you'll basically be able to see the difference if you do like a lot of things, which may break in the shared one, but will not break in the dedicated one. So yeah, I would kind of like to see how they would work under pressure. But on the other hand, I realize that if you're a user, maybe you don't want to, put your most important load on something that's early access program. So yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely some things to call out between, at least for the early access program too. We will offer some credits and incentives for early access folks that are looking to run production loads. And we didn't talk much about the limitations between a shared cluster versus a dedicated, but for Postgres specifically, there's certain functionality that is just a security risk on the shared cell architecture, and we go into a bit of detail of that in the blog post. But that is one limitation. And yeah, I think, I don't know. I personally would also like more feedback along the different capabilities that the two different architectures provide, and the complexity that comes with them. Is it obvious, kind of more along the lines of Richard's take? Is this obvious to a user, the value that you get out of it? And if not, how could we improve? Okay, well, with that then, I guess let's see what it looks like. And Simona, you've raised your hand to give a nice demo, and so I'm pretty excited to see what we got here.
So with the dedicated clusters feature, the first thing you see, like you need a pro workspace first and foremost, and then the first thing you see is there is this tab called clusters, and then you have a list of all your clusters. Now I already have 2, and then you can add one. You can see in the list, you see the name of the cluster, the region where it's located, the number of branches, which are essentially databases that run on it, and the state. And we'll come back to the state once we create one. And there's this button that allows you to basically create a cluster. So you can give it a name, and I'll keep in the tradition and I'll call it third. You can pick one of the regions. I want to also show the connectivity, so let's go for your West one. And these are all the options that we were talking about. So you can choose the Postgres version. I want to do a serverless one, so then you can select the capacity range, number of replicas, different other things like maintenance windows, backup windows, whatever. Deletion protection, which basically will protect from deleting a cluster that has some data on it. You also see this calculator here, which is kind of estimating the cost per month. And yeah, let's just try and provision this one. As you can see, it shows up in the list. There is a different state here. It says provision and cluster. It will run through a number of states until it gets to running. So because that takes time, I'm going to use one of the already created ones to show how you can use a dedicated cluster. So this one already exists. and I have a dedicated a database that is created on it. I can also just create a new one. Let's call it, I'm not really good with names. Let's call it first. As you can see now, when you create a database, you have this default cluster setting, which is by default put to shared, but you can select a dedicated cluster, and this is based on the location, right? So for EU West 1, you have these two. We select the default cluster. Let's also enable direct access so that we can show everything. And we click create. So this is what we created. It's completely empty. It has the main branch. We can add a table. Let's call it first. Let's also add a new column, also called first. And once that is done, I'll use this random data generator to put in some data. And then from this moment on, you basically can use your database exactly as you would for one that's on the shared cluster. For instance, like you can add a record. You can search. If I search for first, I will get the record. What's more, because I enabled that Postgres access, I can also, let me make this a bit smaller. I can also try and directly connect to it. So for instance, I think I already have a string here. If I'm using pSQL, I will delete my API key after this, so don't try it. I'm basically in. It's the main branch. I can do like the tables. You can see the first table. I can do, I don't know, select everything, and I can see all the rows. So yeah, basically whatever you can do on a shared cluster, you can also do on a dedicated one. So if we go back to the clusters, this one is still provisioning. As I said, it takes a while. But what I can show you meanwhile is this one, which is running, can also be stopped. Now, if I stop it and wait a bit and go to the same database, I will not be able to see anything because the cluster is stopped. It takes a while, but okay, now it still works. There may be some caching somewhere, but the moment this one is stopped, you get an error and you can no longer access your data. And this is useful basically if you want to cut costs. Now, in order to see that the new one actually goes to running, I think we still need to wait a bit.
Could you show us creating another branch on and picking the cluster?
I could, but I just started stopping it.
Maybe you could show us on second, maybe?
Yeah, I could try on this one. Sorry. So on second, let me add a database. On the second one, let's see a second database. And And then if I add a branch, let's call it second branch. Here you can again choose. So even if the database was created with the second cluster as the default one, you can still choose. You can create a branch on the shared cluster as well if you want. And it's basically creating a second branch. I can generate some data and see that I can.
Maybe stop sharing and maybe we could talk a little bit about or kind of like the things that we know we still need to do for either like a beta or GA.
So for GA, there are some things that that are not done right now, and we will be adding them. So one of the things that's not completed yet is allowing the user to terminate the cluster. So basically they can stop it, but they cannot terminate it. And also stopping kind of ends after 7 days, because we have that maintenance window and you need to do the maintenance. So with GA, we'll be allowing them to terminate a cluster. Notifications will be in place. And I think the most important one is that we plan to allow copying data from branches that are in a cluster to another one. And then it will not matter if it's moving data from a shared cluster to a dedicated one, or between dedicated, or from dedicated to shared, whatever. So essentially you can start on a shared cluster, and when your project grows and you need more, you can move to a dedicated one.
Perfect. Well, we still definitely have some work ahead of us, but we are excited to get out a nice early access program for anybody who's interested in testing this functionality out. I think that's it, unless anyone has anything else they'd like to add. All right. Well, thank you so much for the time, everybody. Really appreciate it, especially taking time out of launch week. I know there's a lot of work to do, so definitely appreciate your time. And for those listening, check it out. You can apply to join the early access program. Just there's a nice Typeform form embedded in our website and in the blog, and so or just reach out on Discord if you're interested in trying this out. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you all for walking us through the feature. Have a great rest of your day. See you.